Hello and welcome back to Bite Size Boxing. So Brian Norman Jr. has been scheduled in to fight Devin Haney for the WBO welterweight title. What do we think of this? So I think it's an interesting fight actually, and it's one of those that it's going to be quite a difficult one to sort of judge from the outset because in truth we don't actually know that much about Brian Norman Jr. He is essentially a prospect who holds a belt, which really does speak to kind of where the 147-pound division is at, especially now Boots Ennis has stepped up. So straight off the bat, I'll be honest, I'm not a particularly big Devin Haney fan. I don't really like his style. He can often be, very, very evasive, a whole lot of moving, which I don't appreciate. I'm not one of these people who talks about, oh, the sweet science. No, boxing is an entertainment sport. It's supposed to be entertaining. A man running around the ring, throwing don't touch me punches doesn't interest me at all. So I'm not the biggest Devin Haney fan, and particularly that last performance we saw against Ramirez was just, nearly swore there. It was not good. It was horrible. It was god-awful. Because one thing I will give Haney some credit for, although he can be very negative and evasive, he does at least sometimes throw punches and let his hands go. But in his last couple of fights, after the Ryan Garcia fight, what we saw in that Ramirez fight, he didn't even let his hands go. So it was all the movement that we're used to seeing with Haney, but without any of the volume and output. And that made for some pretty grim viewing. He seemed very, very gun-shy in that fight, very hesitant to get hit. So from Devin Haney's point of view, it is going to be interesting to see sort of psychologically how he deals with this. But Brian Norman Jr., as I said earlier, is untested. Yes, he's looked very good, but it's been against a certain level of opposition, particularly that Jin Sasaki fight that we saw. He looked fantastic. But as I said in that post-fight there, Jin Sasaki had some of the worst feet I think I've ever seen in a world title fight, at least in recent years. It was god-awful. He didn't even have any decorum with his footwork whatsoever. It was literally, he was just walking around in the ring as if he just had 5 or 6 pints. It wasn't good. So against Devin Haney, it's a very different kind of fight. So if you go and look at a fight that Brian Norman had previously against a guy called Quinton Randall, that will give you some very good film study going into this fight that I think is actually very, very interesting. You see, Quinton Randall is an outboxer who employs a lot of foot movement, which is exactly what Devin Haney does. And if you look at that fight, it gave Brian Norman fits. Brian Norman really, really struggled in that fight, at least cutting the ring off and getting to Randall. Now, the reason I say that's interesting is, of course, Devin Haney employs a lot of foot movement, as I was saying earlier. He is a very evasive fighter, and for all of Devin Haney's flaws, and as unentertaining as I feel he can be sometimes, one thing I will credit Devin Haney with is that he has got very good feet. So, don't get it twisted, right? Devin Haney might not be that interesting to watch sometimes, but against this type of fighter, a fighter like Brian Norman, who does struggle to cut the ring off, these are the kind of fighters that he thrives on. So yes, Brian Norman has looked brilliant, but as I said earlier, Sasaki barely can put one foot in front of the other, and he's a very aggressive fighter. You see, Brian Norman has looked good when he's had fighters coming towards him and he's been able to get his shots off and counter. Devin Haney won't do that. Devin Haney will make Brian Norman lead and will make Brian Norman come forward. Now, when Brian Norman has to cut the ring off and he has to be aggressive, he is nowhere near as effective as when you allow him to box off the back foot. Devin Haney will be the one who will be dictating and boxing off of that back foot, because if he, Devin Haney is not going to be walking forward. Devin Haney is not going to be holding a peekaboo card and trying to take out Brian Norman Jr. That's not going to happen. We know what to expect with Devin Haney. So Devin Haney is going to get on his bike, he's going to do what he does, he's going to pop a jab, and he's going to, at points, run. Let's be brief and honest, right? So against Brian Norman I can see straight away struggling with that. So it's going to be interesting to see how these stars mesh. If Brian Norman catches Devin Haney, what's going to happen? Because in all fairness, I don't think Brian Norman is the biggest one-punch knockout guy. Yes, he knocked out Jin Sasaki, but Jin Sasaki, as I said earlier, not a great fighter, and also defensively god-awful. Devin Haney, for all of his flaws, is more defensively responsible than Jin Sasaki. He's not going to be walking forward with his chin in the air, asking him to hit him. So, yes, what will happen when Brian Norman lands? Will he land? Will Devin Haney give him the opportunities to land? So I'll be frank, going into this, at least from the outset, again, this is, what's the date today? It is July 1st, 2025, so we are a couple of months out. I'm edging towards Devin Haney in this fight, to be frank. I think that Devin Haney is probably going to outbox him, probably on points. But it's a difficult one because we haven't seen Devin Haney at the 447 pounds yet. We don't really know what he looks like at the weight either. We obviously know he doesn't necessarily hold the best shot. But how is he gonna? And if he does get hit, what will happen? But again, with Brian Norman, you would say at least, although at different weights, Brian Norman is definitely less tested than Devin Haney for all of Devin Haney's flaws. So this is almost a prospect against a guy who's new at the weight, even though it's for a world title. So it's a difficult one. Again, I'm not saying you can read loads into the Randall fight because it was a couple of years ago and Norman has definitely improved since the Randall fight. But I saw enough in that Randall fight for me to tentatively sort of going into this fight, at least from a preliminary standpoint, to kind of favour Haney. Because if you go and watch that fight and you do your film study, in that fight where Norman is being sort of basically having to be the aggressor and having to be on the front foot against a guy who moves, he was really, really struggling and he looked a lot less effective than he's looked against the more aggressive and more limited opposition that we've seen him to face up until this point. So what do you think? You let me know. I'd be interested to hear the discussion in the comments and you guys take care. Thank you very much. Cheers.